Diversity. It's a word we hear a lot of today. Across industry, research has shown that there's a direct correlation between diversity and an increase in the level of innovation. This is especially important in the gaming industry as diverse teams with different experiences and knowledge will no doubt make for more creative and robust titles. Today on Just Saying With, we have with us Darryl Long, Managing Director, Ubisoft Singapore and the Philippines, to talk about how diversity affects or adds to the gaming industry. Hi, Darryl. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us.
Hey, Zed. Thanks for having me.
No worries. Yeah. So, Darryl, diversity, it's such a broad word. How would you, well, you know what? Before we go into diversity, let's talk about you a little bit. So you've been with Ubisoft for quite a while. So you started off in 2003 as the managing director of Ubisoft Winnipeg. And how long have you been in Asia now? So you're running the Singapore and Philippines teams.
Yeah, it's been just over a year actually that I've been in Asia. So I'm still pretty fresh here, still figuring things out and experiencing everything. But actually, so I want to go back. I started at Ubisoft in 2003 as a programmer. And so it's almost 20 years that I've been with Ubisoft, and I worked my way up from, that programming career and becoming a producer and eventually a managing director. So it's been a long, exciting career in video games, and it's interesting because a lot of people they don't see video games as a career, right? They don't think like, oh, I could do video games as a career option, and that's actually true for me too. Starting out, I never thought that I'd go into video games.
Well, I mean, it is an Asian stereotype. It's a stereotype, but even my parents, when I used to play a lot of games. I still do. And they always used to go, "You're wasting your life. Why are you playing games? There's no future in gaming." And that's the thing that's kind of like stuck. They kept going, there is no future in gaming. And now gaming's more or less taken over the world. And and so I get where you're coming from.
Yeah, and I heard almost exactly those words from my dad as well a long time ago. But it was the opposite. It was my mother who led me into this. So back, I'm dating myself a little bit here, but I think when the Commodore 64, and I don't even know if you've heard of that computer,
yes,
but when it came out, my dad went out right away and he thought it was so cool, and he bought one and he brought it home and he set it up and realized he had no idea how to use it. And the thing just sat there and nobody was touching it. And my mom said, "This is ridiculous. We spent thousands of dollars on this thing. We need to figure out how to use it." So she actually joined a computer club and she learned how to use the Commodore 64. And then she introduced us to games. And it was through that. And I started playing games, and back then it was text-based games. And I started playing those, but I wanted to make my own games. And at that point, I'm 8-10 years old, something like that. And my mom said, "Okay, I'll find out how to make games." So my mother went back to this computer group and she said, "How do you make games?" And they said, "Well, you need to learn how to code." So they taught my mom how to code. She learned how to code so she could teach me how to code. And then there I am, a 10-year-old coding my own games. And of course they were terrible. And I was a kid, but that it's something that continued all through my life, as a teenager and going to university. And even when I was working before the video game career started, I was always building games in my spare time. It was a thing that kind of kept me sane through everything I was doing growing up. And it never occurred to me that you could actually get paid to make video games. Until I remember that day, I was on a career website or a job website, and I was looking and I see an ad for a video game programmer job. And I was like, whoa, I didn't know, like, I had no idea that existed, and I applied for it. I mean, the rest is history, but like, I never looked back. It was the right thing for me from the beginning.
Well, that's really, really interesting. And I do have a question around what you've just said, but I'll get to that later on in the show. But my experience was quite different from yours, where my dad bought me. So my first console system was the original NES. But the moment I started playing, he said, "Stop it." So we had no idea why it was bought. Obviously, it was just there for show, so we weren't allowed to use it. But so it's a very slightly different experience there. But Darryl, so to the topic of the show today, diversity, and your background actually, I guess, speaks a lot to that in a sense as well. And now that you're here in Asia, but what is diversity to you in, let's say, the gaming industry, and maybe to you first, and then to Ubisoft? Yeah, because there's so many ways we can look at diversity. What's the scope of diversity you're looking at?
Yeah, I mean, diversity has many, many different facets, right? And I liked what you said at the beginning of the show about how creativity does come from diversity, and I 100% agree with that. And I think that's something that we know very well at Ubisoft. My personal angle on it is, like, I've worked in male-dominated industry almost my whole career. Right. And we know the video game industry is primarily male dominated. And that's something that the industry absolutely has to change. We need to drive that change. And in my early career, I was working in studios that were mostly men. And you see that, like, it forms a kind of hive mind group think where everyone sort of works the same way and thinks the same way. And without the diversity, there's no challenge. Nobody's thinking differently. Nobody's challenging the status quo and saying we should do this differently. And that is, to me, that's what diversity brings, is it sparks creativity. That challenge, that different ways of thinking coming together in new ways is where creativity comes from. And you're absolutely right that it's tied to innovation as well. I mean, the video game industry is constantly changing. It's one of the fastest growing, most aggressive industries out there. And if we're not innovating, if we're not pushing the boundaries, then we're just going to get left behind. And that's where diversity actually makes such a huge contribution. It's shown. I mean, there's studies out there. The McKinsey report shows that the more diverse companies are more profitable companies, things like that. And as a creative company, we need to be a diverse company as well. I've been frustrated by our industry's challenges with diversity, equality, and equity. Our industry needs to do better, absolutely, and embrace diversity. So for me personally, it's been gender diversity is probably the peak. I mean, if we're not gender diverse, then we're missing out on a huge portion of the population in any location, in any part of the world that we're in. When I started the studio in Winnipeg back in 2018, it was something that I wanted to begin with. When you're starting a new studio, when you're starting a new group, it's easier to create that foundation of values. As we were building the studio, we asked ourselves, what are the values we want to have as a studio? And the top one was diversity. So we began right from the beginning with this idea that we need to find out why there isn't more diversity in the video game industry, why there isn't more gender diversity in the video game industry. And we started work with some universities in Winnipeg, Canada, where we were looking at what are the deterrents that women have to going into video game careers, which quickly became what are the deterrents, what are the blockers that women face going into STEM careers. And that it was amazing, like the things that we learned working with the researchers and the universities, and they did a pretty extensive body of research on that. And it showed that it starts as early as age 5. that young women will be told like, oh, well, math isn't really for you, or, oh, technology is too complicated. And these things happen all through a woman's life. As girls are growing up, they're being discouraged from going into STEM careers. And so we started working with the university. How do we build programs and community initiatives that will remove some of those barriers for women and encourage them to go into STEM careers? And that was like, for me, that was huge. It was revolutionary, to learn these things, to be able to develop these programs. And that to me led here in Singapore directly into Ubisoft Singapore joining the Singapore Women in Tech pledge last year, where that pledge was that we'll help our female team members reach their full potential in their careers. We'll expand our talent pool beyond the traditional video game talent pool. We'll work with partners as well. And that's led to a lot of the initiatives here in Ubisoft Singapore in terms of like the groups and the programs, the training programs that we have, employee resource groups that we formed just to talk about and understand better what are the challenges that women face in the video game industry, so we can start to address those blockers.
And so I'm a big fan of Ubisoft and its games, and probably no more than Assassin's Creed. It's one of my favorite games, probably of all time, and I followed the series for a long time. So based on what you've just said, so I believe it was Odyssey where you could first choose the gender of the main character. And so my wife games as well. And we sit down and she has her save and I have mine. And yes, I do normally use the male characters, but now she feels she's got representation in the game where she can choose. It's the same storyline. There are no changes. The characters are just as strong as each other. Is that one of Ubisoft's strategies to be more inclusive?
Absolutely. That's a change that's been going on for years. And I think Ubisoft is a company that does embrace diversity. And of course, there's still so much more work that we need to do. Our studio has been part of that journey. Both Ubisoft Singapore and Philippines have been contributing to the Assassin's Creed series, as you mentioned, for the last, it's been the last, 11 releases in Assassin's Creed, ever since Assassin's Creed 2, actually. And it's been a long journey as well, and a lot of development in our studio, like to build up to that level where we are one of the big contributors to the Assassin's Creed brand and creating those experiences. It goes beyond the borders of the studio, let's say. We're a studio that started as 22 people 13 years ago, and now we're more than 500 working here in Singapore, plus another 150 in the Philippines. And part of our mandate is part of our mandate is, of course, building these great AAA games, but it's also building the ecosystem of video games in Southeast Asia. A good example of that is our membership with the Singapore Video Games Association, the SGGA. We usually have a member of our team. In fact, I think one of our team members, Sanita, was just nominated to the executive committee. And beyond that as well, working with local schools, with student programs, things like that. But even beyond that, with research, as I mentioned, we were doing research in Ubisoft in Winnipeg, Canada, but we're also doing research with the universities here in Singapore. So a lot of it's machine learning, a lot of it's next gen technology and things like that. Like, how can we improve the experience for our players in our games? How can we even improve the way that we build our games? But all of this is to create that ecosystem of creativity in Singapore, in Philippines, and to be able to attract a wide and diverse group of people into our studios to, again, build that creativity. Creativity can't live in isolation. It needs to be fed.
I want to move the peg about diversity just a little bit here. So I'll say the entertainment industry. So maybe comic books were one of the first ones that tapped into the Asian market. You've got so many great artists coming out from the Philippines and Indonesia that, well, they're world renowned. They work for your DCs, your Marvels. They run their own lines on Image and whatnot. You've had Disney and the other production studios that have set up offices here in Asia, well, really to help with time zones and work around the clock on a project. But that's all very operational. So with Ubisoft having your offices in, say, Singapore and Philippines for yourself, not just about gender diversity, how do you feel the cultural diversity has added to Ubisoft as an organization with the Asian offices?
It is absolutely part of our strategy here in Southeast Asia is, let's say there's a unique flavor to the region, right? And that does show itself in the games that people play and even the games that we can build. And that was something that came out of the work that we did with our teams here in Singapore a year ago. When I joined the studio, one of the first things that I did was say, okay, what's important to us? What are our priorities as a studio? What do we believe in? And we did this like consultation and workshop process. There's more than 150 people from the studio involved in that. And there's three main points that came out of that. It was first, we want to be a fun and caring place to work. We want to be a place where everyone's having a good time. And I always say, like, video games are fun. It's entertainment. It should be fun to make games, right? The second is that we need to be courageous innovators, right? We need that diversity of thought. We need to be innovating all the time. And the third is that we need to be the leaders in our industry. And by leaders, I think this one's really impactful, is the team wasn't just talking about being, the best in the industry. It's about being role models. We need to be the role models for the industry and for the communities around us in the way that we act and the way that we contribute. And representing the cultures here in Singapore and Philippines and in Southeast Asia is part of that. We want to make games that reflect the culture, games that will appeal across the world and will sell across the world, because of course Ubisoft's a huge publisher and we sell our games everywhere, but that also have that flavor of what makes Singapore and Philippines so special. And the way that the team wanted to express that is in our vision and our strategy for the studio. And what they came up with is that we'll reach every player in the world from the little red dot. And that story is new to me, right? I've only been here for just over a year. I didn't know, but it's something that really resonated with the team. And I'm sure you know that story too, but I'll repeat it. The way that it came to me was that Indonesia had a joke that the red dot on the map was bigger than the island of Singapore itself.
Yes,
and
that's true.
Yeah, okay. And the Singapore government said, all right, let's own that. Let's be the little red dot that influences the entire world. And that idea really resonates with us. We're a big studio. We have a big contribution through games like Assassin's Creed and Skull and Bones, but still we're a small country that influences the entire world. And the message there is let's punch above our weight class. Let's really hit big. And that inspired our team. And that's why we took that as our vision, is to reach every player in the world from the little red dot. Our team's already best in class. We're already one of the top contributors at Ubisoft. We're making games that are at a world level. We're the team that's one of the premier contributors to Assassin's Creed for the last many Assassin's Creed titles. We're building Skull and Bones. We're the lead studio on Skull and Bones, as you can see behind me. And that's like that. That's an incredibly ambitious game. People don't know about it yet. But it is incredibly ambitious title that's really doing things different. It's truly a one-of-a-kind game. And we're the lead studio on it. We're the lead studio on these huge games. We're the largest studio in Southeast Asia. And that comes with some responsibility, you know, like we do need to be the role models. We do need to show other studios, other game companies in the region what it means to be a great community contributor. And absolutely our intention is to put Singapore on the map for video game development.
Right. And now I just want to move, I mean, what you've said is actually truly quite inspiring. And I just want to move the needle just a little bit for the last facet of diversity that I want to take a look at. And it's going back to what you said in the beginning. You never thought you're going to be in the gaming industry. Functional or professional diversity. The gaming industry, or basically the thought that I could work in the gaming industry, might just be occurring to some. Is there still an opportunity? Is it a must to have a gaming background, or preferred to have a gaming background? But what is it like for people that don't have a gaming background? I don't want to put you on the spot here, but just do they still serve a purpose, a role? When is it too late to join the gaming industry?
That's a really, really great question. I don't think it is ever too late. I've had amazing success stories with people who have come from other industries like construction, for example. A person who's a project manager in construction who then comes into the video game industry, and she built her way up. Like, she relearned all the skills, and the core job skills are transferable, but all those skills about what makes video games unique, she learned all that on the job, and is still very successful. That's just one example. And that idea of hiring diversely is something that we have to embrace as an industry, and get out of this idea that it's always got to be video game developers that we hire. It's something that I say often, is that if you're only hiring based on the length of somebody's resume, you're always going to end up hiring a guy in the video game industry, because it's been a male-dominated industry for so many years that there are way more men out there with long resumes than there are women. And so we have to change our approach. We need to learn from that. We need to adapt to it. So there's three things that we've done in Singapore to address that. One is diverse hiring panels. Make sure that we have representation in the people that are doing the interviews, that we have multiple rounds of interviews with a wide group of people. The second is make sure that we have diverse candidates. It's a fast-moving industry. Often we need to fill a role quickly. And if you just hire the first person that comes along with enough lines on their resume, you're probably going to end up hiring a guy. So we've had to slow the process down a little bit and say, like, let's take the time to gather, 5-6 qualified candidates and then choose the right one. The third is changing our approach of how we take that decision and emphasizing more potential. People who can be amazing at the job, who just maybe don't have the experience yet, and giving those people the opportunity to show that they can do it. That's the hiring side of it, but it's perhaps like it's only part of the equation. Once that person comes in, how do we make sure that they're successful? And that does go back to the Singapore Women in Tech Pledge in part, but it also goes back to Winnipeg. Part of the program that we built with the researchers in Canada was this Women in Leadership program. It's a program designed specifically with a long series of trainings to develop women into leadership roles as quickly as possible, so that we can have better diversity at the leadership level. And we call that Power Up, which is very gamey, but perfect for the situation. The second is with our management program. And that's actually targeted at young Singaporeans and helping Singaporeans develop into the leaders and managers of the future as quickly as possible. So that's, the two sides of it, is bringing people in and then making sure that they're successful in their new roles so they can adapt to the video game industry as quick as possible. The third facet of this is flexibility. Again, we're a creative studio, we're a creative industry. Not everybody works the same. I've worked with quite a few people over the years who would way rather prefer working from like 10 p.m. to 5 a.m. than working, a usual schedule. But we have to accept that we're growing up as an industry. We have more than 85 parents here in the studio. People are at all different stages of their lives. And so we revamped our benefits completely to make it easier for people to be parents and stay in the video game industry. Part of that is flex hours. Allowing people to set when do they start, when do they finish their day. A really good example is people who I'm going to go pick up the kids from school, and then once the kids are in bed, they go back online and they catch up on work. Things like that, giving that flexibility in when people work. And then, of course, the flexibility on where people work. We have a flex hybrid program where people can choose how much they come into the studio to work collaboratively and brainstorm, do creative work, and how much they work at home. So that's those three things all contribute to bringing more people and more diversity into our studio.
No, that's great to hear, and it's it's actually very, very encouraging to see how Ubisoft is. Well, I'm not sure if leading the charge is the right way, right words, but definitely at the forefront of embracing diversity. I've just sent you my resume.
Gladly accepted.
Well, Darryl, thank you very much for joining us today. But one last question, one last thing. What can the listeners, what can people expect from Ubisoft Singapore and the Philippines in the near future? Or, what are the exciting things that are coming up from you guys?
In Southeast Asia, we have a big role to play. And it is about being the leaders in the industry here and putting Singapore and Philippines on the world map as a video game developer. Diversity is incredibly important to us. That flexibility that I talked about, and we have a really solid strategy going forward to bring that unique local flavor of video games to the rest of the world. So, we're already working on the biggest games in the industry with Assassin's Creed and Skull and Bones, and I'm really excited about what Ubisoft Singapore and Philippines is going to bring to the game industry and how we're going to change things in our community here.
Thank you, Darryl. Thanks for taking the time chatting with us today. I know you got a very tight and packed schedule. I am very, very looking forward to Skull and Bones. That's the one I've been waiting for quite a while now. So really excited for that. So Darryl, once again, thank you very much for joining us. And you've heard it from Darryl Long, Managing Director, Singapore and Philippines, Ubisoft. Thank you, Darryl.
Thank you, Zed.